Hi guys! I'm going to do my best to explain the techniques I used while drawing this portrait. This drawing took me about 5 hours in real time. I know I'm going to get that question. So I always start with the lightest graphite pencil, and that will be the 3B. I already drew the sketch, and in this tutorial I will be showing you how to shade and create depth to get a realistic look. There are different ways to sketch, like using grid lines, freehand, with a ruler, or tracing. When I first started drawing, I used a ruler or my pencil as a guide, and I measured everything to be sure the proportions were right. That can really take some time, and it also took away my motivation for starting a new drawing. For me, the fun part is shading and bringing my drawing to life. So now with most of my drawings, I just trace over the basic lines so I can get started. When you do that, it's still important to keep on looking at your reference, because you will lose some of the first lines once you start shading. After every step I use my blending stump to blend the graphite, and I also shade with some extra graphite that's on the stump. Looking at my reference, I pay attention to where the highlights are, so for that I use my pencil eraser. Next I go over the parts that should be darker with the 7B. Then I smudge again. Now the darkest graphite pencil, the 9B. And then I smudge again. I like to draw in small sections, so that way I can concentrate on one part of the face first. And I usually start with the eyes. After drawing the nose and the lips, you can always come back to correct a bit or add details. Of course, you should find out what works best for you. This is just my way of drawing. Because I'm using gray paper, I really wanted the highlights to pop, so I decided to use a white charcoal pencil to see how that turns out. Actually, this is my first drawing on this gray paper. Normally I use white smooth paper, so I'm also trying out different things as I go, to see what works and what not. Now for the nose, I start shading with the 7B. With the needed eraser, I lightened some parts. With a black pencil, I go over the darkest parts. Normally the 9B graphite pencil should be dark enough, but I really wanted the colors to stand out on this grey paper. If you want to know the brand of the pencil I'm using, I have a list of materials in the description box. Now I'm using a white acrylic marker for the brightest highlights. If I think a highlight is too bright, I just shade over it with the dirty blending stump. For the lips I start shading with the 7B and the 9B, and for the darkest parts the black pencil. When I draw freckles, I draw them first and then I shade over them. That way you blend them into the skin, so they don't just look like spots on the face. Now you see me shading the skin with a 5B. And while I do that, I hold the pencil more to the back and I always shade with light pressure. I use a 7B to shade the darker parts and make sure to blend a lot in between the layers with the soft tissue or blending stump. Make sure not to start too dark, you can always build up the layers gradually and make the skin darker as you go. While drawing a realistic portrait, it's important to pay attention to the shadows and the highlights. That really makes the difference. So for the brightest highlights that really need to stand out, I use the white acrylic marker. And for the darkest parts, like the pupil of the eye, the nostrils of the nose, or in between the lips, I use a black pencil. As you can see, I use a blending stump quite often. If you don't have one, but you would like to try it out, you can also make one yourself. I made a video about how to make one, so you can check it out if you haven't already. As I said before, this drawing took me about 5 hours, but I usually don't draw more than 1 hour per day. After about an hour of drawing, I take a picture so I can see if I'm satisfied with how it looks. Maybe then I will notice that the shading on the nose should be darker or something else. I make sure to correct those things the next time I start drawing. So that's when you see me correcting or adding some details afterwards. With very light pressure, I shade with the 7B to make the skin a bit darker. Yes, a lot of shading, because I like a smooth effect. If you don't want your shading to be very smooth, you don't have to shade this much. I start shading the air with the 5B, then I smudge. Now I'm erasing some of the graphite away where the highlights need to be. And I will add some white charcoal. Later on I will blend that again, because I thought it was too white. For the darkest parts on the air, I used the 7B and the 9B, and later the black pencil for the small part of the inside of the air. That's how I go back and forth, shading, erasing, darken a bit, shading, and so on. Also make sure that while you are shading, don't press too hard on your pencil. If you do, you will not be able to correct easily when you need to. Or the pencil eraser won't work that well when you need to add highlights. Gently build up the layers when you want it to be darker. And try not to rush. If you want to achieve a realistic look, a lot of patience is the key. I didn't notice it stopped recording, but I just blended the hairline a bit. Here I wanted to see how the white luminance pencil would turn out and to see if I like it better than the white charcoal pencil. So I went over some parts with it. The result is actually the same with both of the white pencils. I went over the graphite with the white pencil and it turned out a little bluish. So here you see me trying to erase the graphite a bit. And later on, when I'm working on the hair, I will add a bit more detail to the ear. In the next tutorial, I will explain how I drew the hair. And you will also see me correcting and adding some details to the face. So make sure you watch the next video too, to see the end result. I hope this video was helpful, and thank you all for watching.